For decades, Sam Elliott was one of the most recognizable faces in the world. So what happened to him? It's a question more and more fans have been asking recently. In 1966, a 21-year-old young man stood alone beside a grave in Oregon. His father was dead, gone, taken by a sudden heart attack at just 54 years old, and the last words that man ever believed about his own son were these: "That kid is going to go down the wrong path. No goodbye. No last chance to say, 'Dad, watch me, just watch.'" The young man's name was Samuel Elliott. And what happened next, over the following 6 decades, is one of the most quietly remarkable, deeply human, and emotionally complex stories Hollywood has ever produced. Not because it was loud, not because it was filled with scandal or tabloid drama, but because it was real. You could feel it. Because Sam Elliott is the kind of man this world doesn't make much of anymore. So let's go all the way back. Let's start at the very beginning, because that's where everything that matters about Sam Elliott actually starts. It was 1944, August 9th to be exact, Sacramento, California. Samuel Elliott entered the world in the middle of a war, born to a family forged in discipline and duty. His mother, Glenn, had been a Texas state diving champion, a fierce, athletic woman who later became a physical training instructor. His father, Henry, was a man of the land, a predator control specialist for the U.S. Department of the Interior, a practical man, a no-nonsense man, a man who believed in things you could see, touch, and prove. Acting was none of those things. The family eventually settled in Portland, Oregon, and Sam grew up in the kind of rugged Pacific Northwest environment that shapes a person. Mountains, rivers, open sky, the smell of pine and cold air. His father taught him to fish, to work hard, to be useful, and Sam absorbed all of it. But there was something else inside him, something his father couldn't quite understand. He wanted to perform. By the time Sam was 9 years old, he had already made up his mind. He was going to be an actor, not a fisherman, not an engineer, not a wildlife officer. An actor, a real one. Now, you have to understand what that meant in the Elliott household. Sam's father was a man of an entirely different era. He'd survived hardship. He believed in practicality. And when his young son looked him in the eye and told him he wanted to go to Hollywood, Henry Elliott looked right back and said, with the certainty of a man who has seen the world, "You haven't got a snowball's chance in hell in Hollywood." Those words, imagine hearing that from your own father, the one man in the world whose approval you want more than anyone else's. Imagine carrying that sentence inside your chest like a stone. Sam carried it. He carried it for years. He tried to find middle ground. He enrolled at the University of Oregon, studying English and psychology, a concession to reality, a nod to his father's wishes. But he couldn't stay away from the stage. He transferred to Clark College, and that's where something extraordinary happened. He landed the lead role in the school's production of Guys and Dolls. And when Sam Elliott walked onto that stage, when he opened his mouth and that voice came out, that slow, deep, unmistakable voice that sounds like it was carved from the same oak as the American West itself, something clicked into place. A local newspaper reviewed the production. The reviewer didn't just mention Sam, they raved about him. He was destined for this. But here's where the story takes a turn that would mark Sam Elliott for the rest of his life. He re-enrolled at the University of Oregon, partly out of obligation, partly because his father still hadn't come around. He was still trying, still reaching for that approval that never came. And then, in 1966, before anything could be resolved between them, before Sam had a single credit to his name, before he could prove a single thing, his father had a heart attack and died. Sam was 21 years old. He later told an interviewer, his voice quieter than usual. He died thinking, "Man, this kid is going to go down the wrong path." And then, after a pause, "That's the worst part of it. When you don't think your dad's proud of you, sit with that for a moment. Because that is not just a celebrity anecdote. That is a wound. That is the kind of thing a person carries in silence for decades." And if you want to understand Sam Elliott, if you want to understand why he fights so hard, why he's so selective, why he's never chased fame for fame's sake, you have to understand that grave in Oregon. You have to understand a young man with no father left to prove anything to, and a dream that suddenly felt both more desperate and more necessary than ever before. So he did what broken, determined people do. He packed what he had, and he went to Los Angeles. Hollywood in the late 1960s was a machine, a gorgeous, merciless, cold machine. And Sam Elliott arrived with nothing to offer it except his face, his voice, and a stubbornness that had been tempered in the fire of grief. He took classes, he auditioned. He got rejected over and over and over again. To survive, he worked construction. He swung hammers. He carried lumber. He did the kind of back-breaking physical labor that built a body like his and hardened a mind that was already learning patience the hard way. And then, through one of those stranger-than-fiction turns of fate, he got a job working on the house of an assistant director, an actual Hollywood assistant director. The man noticed something in Sam. Maybe it was the face, maybe it was that voice, maybe it was just the way Sam Elliott holds a room without even trying, and he made an introduction. That introduction led to Universal Pictures, and Universal Pictures led to Sam Elliott's very first feature film appearance. It was 1969. The film was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The movie starred Paul Newman and Robert Redford, two of the biggest names in Hollywood at the time. And Sam Elliott, he played card player number 2, uncredited, barely a shadow on screen. He barely existed in that film, but he was in it. And on the set of that movie was an actress who would change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Her name was Katharine Ross. She played Etta Place, the leading lady, the one everyone remembered. Sam saw her across the set and by his own admission couldn't bring himself to say a word. She was the leading lady, he later said. I was a shadow on the wall, a glorified extra in a bar scene. He didn't speak to her. He watched from a distance and told himself it wasn't his place. He had no idea that 9 years later they would fall in love, or that 40 years after that they'd still be together. But we're not there yet. First, Sam had to survive the 1970s. The decade that followed was a grind. It was slow, grinding, invisible work. Television guest spots, small roles, Gunsmoke, Mission Impossible, shows that people forget, roles that didn't stick. He kept taking classes. He kept showing up. He kept being told in that subtle Hollywood way that he was too rugged, too Western, too old-fashioned for the era. This was the 1970s. The world wanted something sleeker, something more modern. Sam Elliott was not sleek. Sam Elliott was a man who looked like he'd been carved out of the American frontier. The mustache had grown in by now, that legendary, extraordinary walrus mustache that would become as recognizable as any costume in cinema history. He'd actually resisted it at first, worried it would cost him roles. But once he let it grow, once he saw how it completed something in him, he never looked back. He was building an identity, slowly, painfully, but he was building it. And here's what most people don't know about those years. Sam Elliott was almost not Sam Elliott. There were moments, dark stretches, where rejection stacked on top of rejection, and the practical voice in his head sounded a lot like his father's. But every time he was tempted to take a job just for the money, he pulled back. Every time someone offered him a shallow, easy role that would have paid well but meant nothing, he walked away. I determined early on that if I wanted to have a long career, I couldn't work for the dollar and do anything that came along, he would later explain. That discipline cost him in the short term, but it is exactly why Sam Elliott is still here. Then came 1978, and everything changed. Sam was cast in a horror thriller called The Legacy, a British production, nothing that should have altered the course of his life. But it did, because on the set of The Legacy was Katharine Ross, the same woman from 9 years earlier, the one he'd watched from across a barroom set and never had the courage to approach. This time they were the lead stars together. This time there was nowhere to hide. It wasn't until we made The Legacy that we actually interacted, Sam said. What followed was not instant. It was not simple. Katharine was still married to her fourth husband, Gaetano Lissi. There was complexity. There was time. There was the kind of slow, real falling in love that doesn't get dramatized the way Hollywood romances usually do. But when it happened, it happened. By 1984, they were married. And 4 months after their wedding, Katharine gave birth to a daughter, Cleo Rose Elliott, their only child. For a man who had grown up as an only child himself, who had lost his father before he could prove himself, who had spent 2 decades building something entirely from scratch, this family was everything. Sam Elliott, the rugged cowboy, the deep-voiced legend, went completely quiet, utterly devoted to his wife and daughter. While Hollywood was burning through relationships like matchsticks, Sam Elliott was home. He was always home. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Sam Elliott became one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces. From Mask to Roadhouse, Tombstone, and The Big Lebowski, audiences fell in love with the quiet strength he brought to every role. The 2000s brought more steady work, the Marvel Universe in Hulk, voice work in animated films, guest roles in prestige television. He remained busy and relevant. He remained exactly who he was. No desperate pivot, just Sam Elliott doing what Sam Elliott does. Now we need to talk about 2018, because 2018 is when Sam Elliott's story reached the moment it had been building toward for more than 50 years. A Star is Born, Bradley Cooper's directorial debut, Lady Gaga's acting debut, a film about love, loss, success, addiction, and the painful cost of fame. Sam Elliott played Bobby, the older brother, the protector, the man who had spent a lifetime carrying burdens in silence. It was the most emotionally demanding role of his career. He was 74 years old, and he delivered the performance of a lifetime. The scene where Bobby finally confronts his brother felt less like acting and more like truth. Everything Sam Elliott had spent decades learning to hide behind those steady eyes suddenly came pouring out. Critics praised it. Audiences felt it. Hollywood finally saw what many had known all along. Sam Elliott wasn't just a Western icon. He was a remarkable actor. He won the National Board of Review Award for Best Supporting Actor. And then came something even bigger. His first Academy Award nomination at 74. Think about that. Think about the young man standing at his father's grave in 1966, carrying those words, "You haven't got a snowball's chance in hell." Think about the years of rejection, the construction jobs, the auditions, the sacrifices, the waiting, the stubborn refusal to quit. And then imagine that same man, decades later, walking the red carpet as an Oscar nominee, with Katharine Ross on his arm. The same woman he first noticed from across a movie set. The same woman he waited 9 years to truly meet. The same woman who became his home. In that moment, it felt as if every chapter of his life had finally come together. And the story wasn't over. A few years later came 1883, Taylor Sheridan's sweeping Western epic. Sam Elliott played She Brennan, a grieving man carrying unimaginable loss while guiding others through an unforgiving frontier. The role felt personal. Not because it was the biggest role, but because it reflected so much of the man behind it. A man who knew hardship, a man who knew perseverance, a man who kept moving forward no matter what stood in his way. His performance earned him a Screen Actors Guild Award, and standing there with that award in his hands, it felt as though something had finally come full circle. As though the son who had spent a lifetime trying to prove himself had finally answered the words spoken so many years earlier. "Watch me, Dad. I made it." And even now, Sam Elliott keeps going. More than 6 decades after arriving in Hollywood, he still shows up, still works, still loves the craft, still sits on film sets simply because he enjoys being near the work. Not because he has to, because he wants to, because he always has. So what happened to Sam Elliott? A boy grew up with a father who didn't believe in his dream. He lost that father before he could change his mind. He carried that wound across decades of struggle. He worked construction to survive. He refused to compromise. He fell in love with a woman he admired from afar and built a life with her. He spent years proving himself one role at a time. And when success finally arrived, it arrived not as luck, but as the reward for a lifetime of persistence. Today, Sam Elliott is still here, still working, still respected, still the same quiet, stubborn, principled man he has always been. And somewhere, in whatever version of eternity you believe in, there is a father who once told his son he didn't have a chance. And I like to think he's watching now, and I like to think he's proud. That's the story of Sam Elliott. If this moved you, share it, because stories like this deserve to be told. Also like and drop your opinion below. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos. Thanks for watching.